Hello and welcome to the Forum for the Massachusetts State Representative for the 9th Bristol District from Dartmouth Town Hall. I'm Paul Santos, your moderator. Glad to have you looking in here today. This is a collaboration between Dartmouth Community Television, Dartmouth Week, and radio station WBSM. I would like to remind people here in the audience tonight that you should refrain from talking and hold your applause, if you would please, till the end of the forum. I would like to let everyone know also that these candidates will be on the state primary election ballot on Tuesday, September 6th, 2022. All right, let's set out the ground rules for tonight's debate. Each candidate will be given 2 minutes for an opening statement. The candidate in the first seat will go first. Candidates will be asked questions from the panelists. The first candidate will be given 2 minutes to answer that question, and each candidate after that will be given a minute 30 seconds, for a rebuttal. The first question will be answered by the candidate in that first seat, and then we'll be moved back and forth down the line. The second question will be answered first by the candidate in the second seat, and then we'll move back and forth as we proceed from there. Each candidate will then be given 2 minutes for a closing statement at the end of the forum. Would like to let everyone know, too, that we did draw the names for seat positions earlier in the night at random. We also want to let people know that if you're watching on YouTube Live, that you can submit questions in the comments section, and we may use them, not necessarily, but we may use them if time permits. At this time, we would like to introduce the panelists for tonight's forum. First of all, News Director at WBSM, Kate Robinson, and the editor of the Dartmouth Week, Mr. Christopher Shea. This time I would like to introduce the candidates for Massachusetts State Representative for the 9th Bristol District. First of all, incumbent Representative Mr. Christopher Markey. And the challenger for that seat is Mr. Cameron Costa. At this time I would like to go to our first candidate. It is the incumbent, as we said, the names drawn at random. It is going to be Representative Christopher Markey, who will be given his opening statement. Mr. Markey.
Thank you, Paul, for the opportunity to be here. Thank you, WBSM and Dartmouth Weekly, for the opportunity to be here. I'm excited to be here. I'm also excited to talk about essentially a closing of our last session, which I think was incredibly productive. And when you look at the production that we had in this last session and you look at the investments we've made, if this were a state of the district, I would say that we are a strong district, and the reason why is the long-term investments that we've made from the early childhood education that we've invested in, an additional $350 million in that. Our early childhood education is invested to $1.2 billion in this budget. Those are essential things that weren't around 10 years ago. We look at our infrastructure and how we, in the last 10 years, have supported and invested in the South Coast Rail, and how the South Coast Rail is going to be an economic engine for our area. And then we look at offshore wind and the incentives we have given to companies to come to Massachusetts, particularly to the South Coast. And we see from Brayton Point all the way down to Falmouth and into Centerville, the investments that people have made in the private sector to make sure that our new energy in Massachusetts is going to be long-term, and it's going to be very, very, very efficient for us in the future. And it also will deal with climate control. Those are the investments that we've made in our area just in the last few years. We've come off of COVID, which would, again, if you look at how Massachusetts did, and particularly our district did through COVID, you would be impressed. We had the vaccination site here in Dartmouth. That's a place where people from New Bedford and Fall River on a public transit line could come and get vaccinated during the peak of our COVID crisis. And during that time, we continued to invest long-term investments like early childhood education, infrastructure, and in the environment. I look forward to talking to you more throughout the evening, and I look forward to talking to you about those particular issues. Thank you for being here tonight.
Mr. Cameron Costa now with your opening statement, please.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be here with all of you, and for WBSM, Dartmouth Weekly, and for you, Mr. Markey, for being here. I'm excited to have the opportunity to speak with all of you, and for those that are at home listening, to talk about what my vision is for the 9th Bristol District, and what our vision collectively is for the 9th Bristol District. Throughout this campaign, I've been tagged as a political newcomer, And while this may be your first time casting your vote for me as your next state representative, I wouldn't use the words political newcomer to describe myself. I stood up for workers' rights and stood up by standing and serving as a trustee on AFSCME Council 93. My commitment to fight for workers is what's earned me the endorsement from AFL-CIO. When we talk about my investment and my position on social justice issues by focusing on affordable housing, mental health resources, food insecurity, and investments in infrastructure to support people's needs, that's what earned me the endorsement from Coalition of Social Justice. And when we talk about my commitment to democratic values and principles, that's what's earned me the support from the chair of the New Bedford Democratic Town Committee. That doesn't mean anything to me unless I can earn all of your votes. Those organizations I will stand by and have supported my campaign because it is important that we have somebody representing us at the state level. September 6th is the primary. It's the date that we're focusing on and that we're working towards. Let's get there together, because at the end of the day, with your vote, not only will I become the next state representative here in the 9th Bristol District, but we'll also have somebody fighting for us at the state level. Thank you so much for being here today. I look forward to answering your difficult questions and hoping I can give my best detailed answer for all of them.
All right, let's go to our first question tonight. We go to WBSM's Kate Robinson, and her first question is for Representative Markey.
I'm going to ask about a ballot measure, a proposed measure. Do you support the proposed referendum on repealing the recently passed law allowing undocumented people to apply for driver's licenses?
I don't support the ballot question, although I didn't support the legislation. And I don't support the ballot question because it hasn't even been instituted yet, so you don't know how it goes, so why even bother with it? I also believe that the people of Massachusetts have elected people who have voted for it, and those elected officials believe that it's the right thing to do. I don't believe it's the right thing to do. I'm not going to go out and advocate and get signatures as some of my colleagues have done and pressured me into doing. I don't think it's the appropriate thing to do, but I don't believe that people in Massachusetts who are not properly documented should be able to get a driver's license. It's a privilege to have that. There are people in line waiting to get to the United States from Portugal, from Mexico, from Guatemala, who are waiting in line, and they can't get here, but yet we're going to give a license to people, a privilege to the people who have cut the line. Now, that doesn't mean immigrants can't get licenses either, because people with work visas, people with student visas, people who are married to U.S. citizens, people with green cards, they're here properly, they're here with the proper documentation, and they can get their license. I, for one, was helping an individual who lived in our house, who was a student, who had a student visa to try to get his license. So the idea that somehow I'm not for the immigrants is not true, but I also believe that it's a privilege, and it's something that only citizens should get, or people who are properly within the United States should get, because it is a privilege, and there are people waiting to get into our country the proper way. Thank you.
Mr. Costa, you have a 2-minute response.
Yes, thank you so much. So I think that, I wouldn't support any ballot initiative to repeal the law, as I think legislators acted in good faith when voting yes on this piece of legislation. I think it's very clear, right, what this bill was set out to do. Of course, it was to provide licenses for those that are undocumented, but it also was to ensure that there was an increase in public safety. As many legislators worked with chiefs of police around the area, around the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, to ensure that there were loopholes in the original amendments filed to be closed. So I supported the final version of that bill. I've said no when people have approached me on putting it on the ballot, and of course, when elected, I would work to make sure that this doesn't see the light.
Mr. Markey, you have a 1:30 rebuttal.
I don't know how it helps public safety. Getting a driver's license, we know, doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a good driver. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get your insurance. It is a great slogan, and it makes it sound great, but it doesn't do what it says. Individuals who are citizens still get charged with operating to endanger, still go through stop signs, still get charged with uninsured operation of a motor vehicle. Those things all happen. The magic of having a license doesn't change that. It doesn't change behavior. So the idea that this is a public safety issue is a misnomer. And it comes back to the principles of what government should be doing. We should be making sure people reach their potential through the law. And until the federal government changes the immigration law, which they should, it's a privilege, and it shouldn't be given to a person without the proper documentation.
All right, time for our second question now, and it will be asked by Christopher Shea of Dartmouth Week, and it will go to challenger Cameron Costa.
Moving on from cars to roads, my question is about Route 6. Namely, the town and state tend to differ greatly on how to improve, especially the Tucker Road intersection, which tends to have a lot of blockages leading to other blockages. What can you do to try and help these goals align between the town and the state and, stop these blockages?
So I think it's clear the Dartmouth Master Plan, frankly, does, I think, an amazing job in outlining some of the things that the state has done and to really understand the failures, I guess you could say, in an essence, of Route 6 and some of the traffic blockages. I think they also do a great job in explaining how the state really needs to move forward on changing the zoning laws to make it a mixed usage zone for allowing of the creation of affordable housing and tackling that issue. But there also needs to be an investment in the state to fix many of the problems on Route 6, right? When we talk about pedestrian safety, there aren't many crosswalks or lights that allow for safe crossing of Route 6. When we talk about handicap accessibility on Route 6, it also is not there. So I think we need to really be focusing on some of these public safety concerns when we're looking at investing in Route 6. And I would work very hardly and work in collaboration with our town select board, with their planning board, and ensuring that we are getting a collaboration between the state and with the town to kind of push those two ideas together. I think that our state has already spent so much time with low impact studies and different kinds of studies on Route 6, and it's time for action now.
Mr. Markey?
Sure. First off, the state has nothing to do with zoning. It's local. It's entirely local, so the idea we're going to change zoning at the state level is not appropriate. It's exclusively the rights of the individual towns and municipalities. Secondly, we have made huge investments in Route 6. From Tucker Road to Fons Corner Road, years ago we fixed that. From Fons Corner Road out to 195 and the overpass, that has been fixed. The corridor all the way up to Old Plainville Road and to Old Fall River Road, all of that has been developed so that we can have those medical buildings that have been invested into our community, which what does that do? That increases our tax base, and that helps our citizens. More importantly is we're having meetings all the time on the Route 6, Tucker Road, Hathaway Road, and there is a plan. Unfortunately, years ago, the town wouldn't spend the money on the eminent domain. I tried to get some money from the state and offered some of the money through different creative ways through the Department of Transportation, but the eminent domain was a significant halter to the town and who was not willing to pay at that particular time. As a result, the new plan came out and it's been developed, and it's at its over 25% review, and it's being funded, and SERPED is involved in it. Finally, for safety, we have created safety. We put new sidewalks on Route 6 from Cross Road to Reed Road, and you can go by there anytime and you can see that there's all types of development that's going on there. So the idea that we're not doing anything, there's no leadership on Route 6 is, again, not true.
Mr. Costa, you have the final word on this?
Yeah, well, I don't think it's frankly just focusing on that there isn't leadership or an investment on the state, right? I think they have obviously made crucial investments, but the question is still, right, there are still problems happening on Route 6. And there are still things happening in the town that need to be fixed, right? For example, in the master plan, it explicitly states multiple times about the investment needed to fix the sidewalks, to fix the handicap accessibility when we're talking about public safety. So while issues may have been done in the past and investments may have been done in the past, it's still very much needed.
All right, let's proceed to the third question tonight, and it'll be asked by Kate Robinson for Chris Markey.
And it's another ballot measure. What's your position on the ballot measure that would add a 4% tax on any income above $1 million to go towards public education, transportation, and infrastructure?
Sure. The millionaire's tax is a tax that places 4% additional tax on people who are making $1 million or more a year. I'm against it. It's the easiest thing in the world for me to do is for it. It's 0.4%, 0.04% of the population is affected by it. 19,600 taxpayers will be affected by the millionaire's tax. But it's horrible economics and it's horrible politics. First, it takes away the responsibility of me. I'm saying I want to vote on taxes, yes or no, increase or decrease. I voted, I still have filed bills to increase taxes to 5.3% because I think we can afford that. Someone making $100,000 a year can pay an extra $300 a year in taxes. I think that's appropriate. The idea of putting more taxes on individuals who can leave this state, who have the ability to leave this state, we leave behind 9%, we leave behind that 5% for all of their taxes. Some have estimated if a third of the individuals who are the top 900 taxpayers in the Commonwealth left, we would lose $700 million in taxes. But the politicians and the people who are elected like it because then they don't have to take a tax vote and they don't have to worry about dealing with it at an election. I'm more than willing to talk about it at an election. I'm willing to take those chances and to do those things. Now, economically, when you ask for so much money from so little people, there's going to be a problem. And if you look at the percentage, again, you have to look at the details of this to understand it and understand that the capital gains tax is the majority of that. So that means if you own a business and you sell it one time, you're going to get taxed more on that. And those capital gains in 2008, we lost almost $1 billion in tax revenues during that recession.
Time, please.
Just because of that.
Mr. Costa?
Yes, so the Fair Share Amendment is frankly there to really make crucial investments in education, transportation, infrastructure. And of course, the legislature has moved recently to really make those types of investments in these different areas, in big part because of the federal funding that we received and through capital bond bills, or bond bills rather. But when that money dries up, frankly, we're going to need new streams of revenue. And this is one of the best ways that I think that we can really push to make sure that those investments are remaining in there. So much so that I've even had conversations with people that have talked about how with the passing of the Fair Share Amendment and the expectations of revenue increases for our state, how people would like to now see a disinvestment from education, from transportation, because of the makeup that is going to be there. We need to keep levels the way that they currently are, and this is just a way to build upon the investments that have already been made in those three sectors to ensure that we create and solve many of the different issues, right? When we talk about solving affordable housing in Dartmouth, we can't do that unless we expand transportation, unless we expand an investment in water and town sewage, right? Those are all things that cannot happen without additional revenue increases, and that's what the Fair Share Amendment does.
Mr. Markey, you have the last word on this one.
Sure, I would just say we have tax revenues in excess of our expenses this year of $2.4 or $2.9 billion. We have an excess of taxes. We owe a responsibility to the taxpayer. We don't just continue to make social programs and continue to put money into things that just feel good, and they do feel good that you can do these things. But in the end, you still owe a responsibility to a taxpayer. And when you have $2.9 billion in taxes in excess, and you're asking for more money, again, one of the average top 900 taxpayer, if he left this state, we would lose $2.4 million in revenues. That's just one taxpayer. Why would we do that? We are working well within the system we have. We are responsible. We're investing in long-term investments. It's making sense now. Why would we change that? And the other thing is, it's in the Constitution, which means you can never change it. It'll take 8 years. And again, the flexibility that you need to be nimble as a legislator to determine what your revenue is going to be and what your expenses are going to be, it happens every 2 years with an election. I'm willing to take that chance. Many other legislators aren't willing, and I know Cameron's not willing to do that as well.
Okay, our next question comes from Chris Shea from Dartmouth Week, and we'll start with Mr. Costa.
Going back to infrastructure, many local officials here, especially every other Monday night at select board meetings, will like to note that the Payne Narren Bridge is in desperate need of repair. What can be done to, address this?
Yeah, so I think that the legislature had a chance to really make crucial investments into fixing the Payne Narren Bridge. When I was watching, I didn't have the opportunity to be here in person, but when I was watching one of their meetings recently, within the past month, they were talking about how it's constantly getting stuck and how it's causing a headache for people, and how there really needs to be an investment in the state bridge. So I would definitely work to sponsor any kind of infrastructure legislation or spending bills that really support the implementation of fixing our roads and bridges. Of course, the legislature has moved recently with the influx of federal funding and with the bond bill for infrastructure, but I would really like to see that money coming down here into the South Coast into fixing that problem, right? But even when we're talking about this position to serve the 9th Bristol District, we're also talking about the city of New Bedford. So it's also about making sure that we're also getting funds to support the redevelopment process of the New Bedford-Fairhaven Bridge.
Mr. Markey?
I've been trying to do this for a long time, and I can tell you that there's days where it's incredibly frustrating, and there's days where I think there's glimmers of hope. This type of money, which is about $24 million, has to come through the bond appropriations, through the governor's office, and through the administration. So what happens first is it just doesn't happen that you vote for it and say, oh, we got $24 million. It doesn't go that way. What happens is there's different programs that support bridges. I've even tried to get DCR to give money because it's a scenic highway or a scenic road that we've used, and try to get money that way in the engineering stage and trying to figure out all these things. I've been in contact with Tim Barber to making sure we can try to find any grant money possible that we can. But in the end, you need to have a governor who's willing to spend the money on that particular project. It's a hefty sum, and we need to fix it, and we've been trying to fix it, and I think we will fix it. But the idea is it's just not that easy to get that when you look at the other investments that Cameron spoke of, which are the New Bedford-Fairhaven Bridge, which is hundreds of millions of dollars in the end. And you look at some of the other bridges that are dilapidated along the main thoroughways. We become less because of the nature of where the road is. Again, but when you look at it, you look at the causeway that we've invested in. It's beautiful. It allows people to walk safely, to bike safely. It's got great lighting. People aren't walking down there at night in total fear of getting hit by somebody driving down the road.
Time,
so I
please.
think it's a safe place to go, and it will get better as we go.
Final comment from Mr. Costa, please.
Yeah, I think what Mr. Markey talks about is extremely true when we talk about how it is going to be a hefty price tag to it. The Fair Share Amendment also fixes that problem when we're talking about supporting new revenue streams to the state and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So, of course, right, it is everything that requires an investment from the state is going to have a heavy price tag on it. And it's also going to require somebody in the governor's corner office that is going to support these types of projects. One of the best ways that we can do that is by passing the Fair Share Amendment, and it's why I also support that it specifically will also help the investment in infrastructure.
Our next question comes from WBSM's Kate Robinson, and it'll be addressed to Representative Markey.
Representative Markey, you said before that the state has collected billions more in tax revenues than expected this past fiscal year. What are your ideas on how best to appropriate those funds?
Well, I am a big supporter of Governor Baker. However, I don't think it is a big gift with a big bow on to give to him and say, spend it before you leave office. I think that is a lot of money that, one, some of it should be returned to the taxpayer. Two, it should be invested in the rainy day fund, because we know how important the rainy day fund is as a result of the last 2.5 years in dealing with COVID and the need to go into that and get that. Those are the things that I think in the long term, I think there's an obligation by us also under previous law to provide some of that money back to the people and the taxpayers. But I also think, again, the idea that somehow the fair share amendment is going to create all this money to be able to put the new Paid Narrow Bridge in. Again, that is bonding money. That is money that comes from borrowing money and not just comes out of the budget to go towards those things. And to make sure that you have the bonding and to do those things, you need to be able to be responsible to the bonding agencies and making sure you have the lowest bond rating so that the taxpayers are paying the least amount. And I would encourage people to look at the way in which bonding works so that they can have an appreciation for how the governor's office makes these decisions, and we just make sure that we have it on a list, and the Paid Narrow Bridge is on a list.
Mr. Costa, your rebuttal?
I think that one thing that I have recognized in going throughout this district is that people are hurting right now. And that requires some financial assistance from the state. Now, of course, right, the state legislature had their plans to give checks to people between $38,000 and $100,000, up to $250 and up to $500 for married couples with a different income threshold. But they were caught off by surprise in that 1986 referendum. To me, that is failed policy planning. And to essentially scrap that because they didn't want to give Governor Baker a win in a sense of him distributing this funds to people is poor policy planning. Politics has no place when we're talking about people's financial need, when we're talking about supporting people. And I get it, right? $250, that may get you a week's of groceries. That is not enough, right? But it's a week's worth of groceries. That's support that would have directly helped people, and for them to just wait until next year when a new governor could possibly take the win was just failed policy planning.
Mr. Markey, final comment.
Sure, I would not say it's failed policy planning. It's actual being responsible with people's money. If the governor is going to cut $2.4 billion and give it back to the people, and we're going to cut $2.4 billion, that's $4.8 billion that's cut. That's less money in the rainy day fund. That's less money for investment. That's a big problem. And we looked at it in a responsible manner to make sure that we didn't do that. And the idea that we're waiting for another governor, I don't think is a fair way of looking at what we're doing. We're looking at it and saying, we can't take 2 cuts in taxes. We can only take 1. And let me tell you, the economic development bill that was filed, and we couldn't come to an agreement with the Senate, that is something that I believe we'll be back in session on, because it's going to have a huge impact on our local hospitals and our disproportionate hospitals. We need that money desperately for South Coast hospitals, and we will make sure that we get that by the end of the year, because we will not be able to have St. Luke's Hospital if we don't start worrying about that.
All right, the next question will be asked by Dartmouth Week's Christopher Shea and will be addressed to Mr. Costa.
Proposed new state septic system regulations by Mass DEP, which is aimed at, decreasing nitrogen, levels in our waterways here on the South Coast, could affect up to like 2,000 homeowners. Do you think this is the right approach for the state to take? And what are some ways you would like to see, the state help people, not have to deal with such a financial burden? Because it could cost up to like $10,000 to $15,000 per septic installation.
It's very clear, right, when we talk about how there needs to be investments in, my understanding, I guess, or I believe, is that the reason for this change, and when we're talking about DEP and wanting this change in septic tanks, is to make sure that there isn't any kind of spillage, in a sense, into the Buzzards Bay and into water systems, which is true, right? We need investments to protect the bodies of water that surround us. But I also think that it's disheartening to hear the options that are in the talks right now of having people change septic tanks right now, and it could cost up to $10,000 to $15,000. So I think that there needs to be more investment in the state, and really in looking more into this, into coming up with different ways and innovative ways to really solve this problem or solve this issue in a sense. When I was talking to somebody recently, they were telling me how in the portion of the town that they live in, when they were expanding water access or water pipes, I guess you could say, underground, how they were forced to then take out a second mortgage on their home just to afford those payments to have access to town water. That is not my goal or my hope for this issue, right, when we're talking about supporting people. And I definitely think that it needs to be followed up with. And as your next state representative, it is something that I will continue to follow up with, ensure that people are being protected and they're not having to take out this significant financial burden.
Mr. Markey, your response?
Yeah, I've been on phone calls with DEP and Zoom meetings with DEP to learn exactly what these regulations are going to be, and they haven't even been determined yet. So it's a long way off. There's going to be a public comment period, and there's going to be an opportunity for the public to speak and people from Dartmouth. And I've spoken with the health director here in Dartmouth, Chris Michaud, several times on this particular issue to figure out what the solutions are. The one thing I do know is when they've done these things in other states and other areas, they have created funds in which there are low-interest loans for individuals to pay the money, you pay it back, and the next person will get the investment into their septic system. But again, it goes back to, yeah, you'd like to give away everything, but when you put in a sewer line and you put in a water line, it's called a betterment. It's bettering your property, and the town shouldn't pay for that. And the state shouldn't pay for that. It's you who should pay for it. You're the one who's made the investment in your home. You're the one who's going to make money off of your home when you sell it. It's called a betterment. And it's your responsibility to do that. And the way the state operates is you can get low interest loans, or the town says you don't have to pay it all off at once. You pay it off each year, a little bit more at a time. And you can stretch it out over 20 years. So you're paying an extra $1,000 a year. Yeah, it's a little bit more money, but
Time, please.
trust me, you'll sell your house a lot more when it's on town sewer and town water than it is on septic.
Mr. Costa, final word on this one?
Yeah, I think it's an amazing assumption to assume that people flexibly just sell their homes all the time to really just make a profit. I think there needs to, as Mr. Markey said, right, it's all about keeping a close eye on this issue, and it's something that I would 100% make sure to do to really make sure that people have somebody looking out for them, and making sure that we are coming up with creative ways. Because I love how every single time it's about, well, we'll just offer somebody a low interest loan so that way then the state can make money from it, or whoever the private investor is backing those loans, right? So instead of us constantly talking about how our low income and middle income families that are already struggling to make ends meet, already struggling to make these payments, what does that look like? If we're talking about a low interest loan, just an interest alone, let's just say that's an extra $50 a month. How many meals are you not going to be able to put on your table now? How many mortgage payments are you going to have to offhold? How many medications are you going to have to save until you can make enough money to pay for it next month? So while I think that that is, of course, a great option as we look at other states that have implemented similar things, I think we also need to recognize that at the end of the day, we need to look at the fallout. And I think that it'll be significantly large for people when we look at the bottom line and their general expenses.
All right, Kate Robinson from WBSM has the next question, first addressed to Chris Markey.
Let's talk about inflation. Do you think enough is being done to curb rising costs? And why or why not?
I think if you watch the news enough and you read enough, you can see that it's a balancing act. When everything is going great as it had throughout the early 2000s up into 2008, and how it's gone from 2011 all the way to 2020, everything is great. Interest rates are low. People are being able to buy houses that they probably couldn't afford if the interest rates were what they are now. But you need to be able to contract the economy. At the same time, you want people to come back and start to work. And I think President Biden, I think the Fed has done a very good job of gradually increasing the interest rates to allow that growth to slow down. While if you look at the numbers for the employment that have gone up dramatically in the last month, there is hope. And the idea that I think people are suffering in our district, I don't think there's that suffering that we had in 2008 and 2009, because we're at the lowest unemployment rate pre-pandemic since 2000 and I believe it was 16. Our unemployment rate is below 5 right now in Greater New Bedford. That's impressive considering we just came back from a pandemic. Are there things we want to do more of? Yeah, there's definitely things we want to do. That's why I'm doing this job. I want to do more because I care about this community. I care about where my family grows up. I care about my kids, and I care about potentially my grandchildren and where they live. I want this place to go smoothly over the next 20, 40, 50 years. I think I have the experience to be able to do that because I can talk about these things in detail and try to tell you that we are doing a tremendous job in keeping the unemployment rate down, investing in long-term investments in our infrastructure, and we will continue to do that over the next 2 years.
Mr. Costa?
Yeah, I think the state has done a great job in a sense of investing in long-term investments that are going to support multiple different projects. The assumption, though, that because unemployment is down, that people aren't hurting is just factually not true, at least from the doors that I've knocked on and the people that I've called. Because they may not be unemployed, but it doesn't mean that their wages are rising at the same amount that inflation is. So I believe that that is just factually not true. In regards to supporting further investments, right, that's just classic economic strategy when we're talking about coming out of a high inflationary period, even though we're still in one right now, because we look for long-term investments that are going to pay off in the end and support people and making sure that they have access to their basic needs, like housing, like access to food, like access to clean water. So I definitely think that we need to do more investments in that piece. And obviously that's something that would be addressed in the next session. But also at the same time, you know, I think, as Mr. Markey said, right, President Biden and that administration has done, and the Fed at least has done a good job in trying to curb the amount at which inflation has grown, and we see that in gas prices coming down recently. But of course, we can always do more to invest in these services that are going to be long-term investments to support people.
Mr. Markey, final comment on this issue.
No, I think, I mean, time will tell. I think everybody is closely watching this at the federal level. I think the governor's office is doing that. I think Secretary Heffernan is doing that as well. We're concerned about it, but I think the way in which our country has gone, we've balanced it out in a way in which we're doing a very good job of it.
All right, our next question is going to be addressed to Mr. Costa, and it'll be asked by Mr. Shea of Dartmouth Week.
I've been noticed that there's a few people coming in that are kind of soaking wet, which is a rarity these days, which leads me into my question. There's, you know, as you know, there's been a big drought going on, and farmers have been really bearing the brunt of this. You know, crops have been failing. A lot of things are past, I've heard, the wilting point. So what do you think the state should do to, you know, try and help out farmers, and what they can be doing, you know, moving forward to, you know, mitigate, you know, worse droughts in the future that are caused by climate change?
Water is so essential, as we all know. And it's funny that you mentioned that, because I was talking with somebody earlier about how, you know, we don't necessarily care if our lawn is brown right now because of the drought issues that are happening. But with that being said, I think everything has to be on the table when we're talking about investing in innovative strategies to address water concerns, right? We need to do more to invest in slow drip irrigation that really supports, you know, getting water directly to the roots of agriculture and crops. We need to make sure that we're providing educational opportunities for our farmers in this area to learn more about different ways to learn the process of farming in these types of conditions if they don't already know. It also means pulling together our farmers and having those conversations throughout the district to figure out what their needs are in curbing these effects as well. If that means more educational opportunities, if that means more investments in different types of technological advancements that could really support them. Because my ultimate goal is that we continue to get food from the town of Dartmouth into the city of New Bedford and throughout regions across this area. But that can't happen unless we make more investments in more investments in the support of creation of better and cleaner water. And that just is something that has to happen pretty much today, because it's water, right? It's essential.
All right, Mr. Markey, your response.
Sure. I would just say that for the last 10 years, I've been working very closely with the farmers. At one point, I was Legislator of the Year for the Farm Bureau. I work with CMAP. I'm one of the individuals who filed a amendment every year to the budget to get $500,000 towards exactly what Cameron was talking about, which is training and technical assistance to farmers. You got to understand essentially that we do not have corporate farmers in Massachusetts. We have small farmers who mostly do CSAs, local farms, and they need the assistance and subsidies so that they can learn more. And when you put them all together, as I've gone the last 4 years, or actually the last 2 years they didn't have it, but the CMAP educational program at Bristol Aggie, and you see all farmers throughout the state come. The Commissioner of Ag comes down, speaks with the individuals who are the farmers, and then they get to learn and they train how to grow certain crops in certain conditions. That stuff is already happening. It happens every year. And there's farmers I speak with on a weekly basis to talk about these issues. So the idea that we're not progressing in this fashion is, again, not true. And the idea that water is a huge issue, obviously it's a huge issue right now. And we have mechanisms with our own water supply in Dartmouth that make it clean. The flushing on the water up on Reed Road that you
Time,
see,
please.
that's the result of huge water mains that are holding back water. And they need to be flushed out so that they can keep
Time,
the
please.
bacteria away from growing in it.
Mr. Costa?
Yeah, I think it's great, right, when we talk about the educational opportunities, there can be more. And talking about really supporting farmers and coming up with ways to get them crops that are more drought friendly, as well as also for people that are looking at more landscaping opportunities in their homes and educational opportunities when we talk about more drought friendly landscaping ideas. And really just emphasizing that educational piece, not only just for our farmers, but also for people throughout the community. What I would hate to see, as we've seen in many different states and many different communities, that their way of handling the drought problem is by just fining people, right, and just by increasing rates. And of course, right, water is getting a little bit more expensive, but I think we can do more to try and educate people on water usage, that we can, spread out, right, the subsidized programs, and we're talking about rain collection barrels. And of course, that depends on rain, but it also helps curb that problem. So I think there are a number of different things, and that's why I've made my position very clear when we're talking about water, that nothing is off the table. Everything needs to be looked into, and we can do more investing to ensure that we are getting people clean access to water.
Okay, the next question will be asked by WBSM's Kate Robinson, and it'll be addressed first to Representative Markey.
The commuter rail is coming to New Bedford, and the 9th Bristol District is right next to one of the stations. Do you think the MBTA needs a change? And what types of state tax relief programs or infrastructure improvements would you like to see?
Well, first, I'm really happy with the transportation and the economic development through the House. The bill that passed the House had $250,000 that went towards investments for design of carbon-neutral buildings around the Kings Highway train station. So the idea being that we do smart growth in that particular area, much like what you see at University Ave if you've gone off of Route 128 or like 95 up in the Canton area, where there's retail, then there's some commercial, and then there's residential living. That is how I see the future of Kings Highway in that particular area, where you're going to see totally different. You're not going to have strip malls, and you're going to have places where people can drive and walk around and shop and then also live. Those are the things that will happen as a result of South Coast Rail. The investments that will come down are immense. People are going to be able to come to New Bedford, live in New Bedford, see the beauties of New Bedford and Dartmouth, be 5 minutes away from a train station, and be in Boston in an hour and 19 minutes. And if you've been there to Boston lately during the traffic, you will understand that an hour and 19 minutes guaranteed is worth every penny. But that investment also brings people down because they want to have families that grow up in places where they have beauty, like Dartmouth does and New Bedford does. And when you have the experiences we have been fortunate to have in this great community, you want to be able to share them, and that's what they want to be able to do. And that is what will happen. Then all of a sudden, education in New Bedford will increase, because people will care and value the education, and parents will be involved. That's what happens when you have people who value education. Kids do better. When you don't have parents who don't value
Time, please.
education, it does not do well.
Thank you. Mr. Costa?
Yes, so I think it's clear, right, in regards to your question about the MBTA, there needs to be more transparency there. As many local, or not local rather, as many elected officials across the state have been calling on for more transparency in the MBTA and their process, especially with the future investments that are going to be made in the MBTA. In regards to the South Coast Rail, I am super supportive to ensure that we are connecting the South Coast and the southeastern region of Massachusetts into Boston. I think it was far too long that it had happened, and I'm glad that it finally did. I also, though, would be mindful of the language that we use when we talk about people coming down here from Boston to the city of New Bedford, where they can find more affordable options than they could if they were living in Boston, right? That is already starting to affect our communities. That is already starting to affect the rates when we're talking about housing, and it's already starting to affect the access to housing here in the 9th Bristol District. So, with this investment in the South Coast Rail, we also need to do more investments in trying to support the increase of housing production by setting tough goals to ensure that we're building at those rates. We're also preserving land and ensuring that there's access to that, which happens by supporting towns and making sure that we're doing that. So transparency, we need to make sure that we're also protecting the access to affordable housing here in the city of New Bedford and the town of Dartmouth, to make sure that when we create this access, we are actually providing something for people, not just higher rates.
Mr. Markey, final comment on this issue, please?
I think we are providing, for a lot of people, an opportunity to have a job in Boston, which is a high-paying job, and live in beautiful New Bedford and Dartmouth. That's an incredible opportunity that a lot of people wish they could have. That's what I hope South Coast Rail does. That's the idea, is always getting better. If we're going to slow it down, why would we do that? Yeah, there's concerns with it, but the idea is the American dream is to own a house, not to rent a house. We need to get people to be able to buy a house. And you need to do that through tons of changes at every level of government. Zoning needs to change in a lot of the towns to allow for home ownership, workforce housing. That's how it's going to change, because then the rent market, the supply goes up, which means because the demand is going down and people are buying houses and leaving rental properties, and then the rents go down and people can save money for a down payment eventually, and then they can buy a house. That's the American dream. And that's what the South Coast Rail does. It provides that for so many people.
All right, the next question will be asked by Mr. Christopher Shea, and it'll be addressed first to Mr. Costa.
Speaking of homes, currently the EPA is cleaning up about 5 homes in the Bliss Corner neighborhood, but Mass DEP knows that there are around 20 that could probably, use a cleanup as well, but the town and state are at odds about, the liability and how to expand that cleanup. How would you like to see that cleanup expanded, and how can you try and mediate between the two parties?
First, I'd like to say it's horrendous what has happened to the families that are affected by this, and my heart goes out to them first. I am glad to see that the state has taken a position in investing more in supporting the cleanup of Bliss Corner. Of course, we would have hoped for more to support that cleanup, but it also means that we're working with our federal legislators to secure more funding and the involvement of EPA to support this cleanup process in the Bliss Corner area, in the town of Dartmouth. I also would like to see more, I guess you could say, investigations, in the sense to ensure that we have a more locked down area in regards to where our efforts can be used. Those 5 homes are not enough, right? I think when we're talking about 20 homes, we need to support those families. We need to make sure that we're investing in this process of cleanup and also keeping an accountability factor on this process to ensure that we're supporting those families through this difficult time.
All right, Mr. Markey.
It's going to be more than 20 houses. There's no doubt about that. The problem with Bliss Corner is the depth of the contamination is not that significant. It's not like Parker Street in New Bedford where there was significant, it was a dump there, essentially, when we put a junior high school there and a high school there. So you knew there was going to be significant contamination. Here, it is spread out over blocks. And trying to determine who the responsible party is very difficult. And it takes a mature, thoughtful way of going about this in a deliberate way. Because the potential are the people we represent. The town of Dartmouth and the city of New Bedford could be the responsible parties. And under the law, and again, you have to follow the law, is the responsible party would end up paying for that. And how does that affect the town and the city? I have fought, again, through legislation and filing bills and trying to get money, is to get $250,000 for money for assistance in cleaning up. Actually, I believe it's 2.5 million, but to clean up the area. The reason why these 5 houses are getting cleaned up now is because of the nature of the chemicals that are on the property now, and the EPA can come in immediately and deal with that. As we progress and as we potentially litigate this, this is an issue that the town and the city and the DEP are going to have to resolve.
Time, please.
The more testing we do is the better off we are, and that's why there will be more than 20 houses that need to get cleaned up.
All right, Mr. Costa, final comment on this issue.
So Mr. Markey is correct, right? It is going to take a mature and thoughtful mindset in regards to handling this issue. And it's why I would 100% be on board with an oversight commission to really oversee this project through. And the supporting of our EPA, the supporting of any local and state officials that are in there working in private-public partnerships, right, and leveraging that to really support those families. Of course, it's going to be over 20 homes. And of course, we need to take a careful step forward on this issue because it's about who's responsible. But at the end of the day, we're talking about people's homes, and we're talking about, as Mr. Markey mentioned before, the possible resale value of that home. So I think we need to do more and expedite that process, essentially, to really support this cleanup process at Bliss Corner.
All right, Mr. Markey.
I would just say that I don't think there could be anyone who's more supportive of trying to clean it up than me. I've met with Senator Markey. I've met with Congressman Keating, their staff. I am constantly trying to figure out mechanisms in which we can do this and get this done. It's a huge problem. I know many of the people who live in that area. I know where they came from. They have lived the American dream, and that's my concern. That's their generational wealth right there. That's what they're going to be able to pass on to their kids. And it scares the hell out of me that we're not going to be able to do a good job for that. And that's what motivates me to make sure that we do a great job on it. And we will. But again, part of the responsibility is figuring out who's responsible for this and making sure they pay. It's not that simple. It's very complicated. And because of the nature of the bureaucracies at both the federal level and the state level, it takes time. But we are pushing forward with that every day.
Mr. Costa, one more comment.
I think we both have kind of said enough on this issue and just making sure that there needs to be more oversight to support this cleanup process and leveraging more funds to really support that process as well.
All right, thank you. That concludes the questioning portion of our program. We are now going to move on to the closing statements. As we said, we picked the names out of a hat in order to determine the order. So for the closing statements, we're going to begin with the challenger, Mr. Cameron Costa.
Yes, thank you so much for allowing me to be here today with all of you. I know some of you are here for the later debate, but hey, it still works for me. And for those that are watching at home or watching later on, thank you so much for tuning in. So that way we can really talk about what our vision is here in the 9th Bristol District and making sure that we're working together for what it is that you need at the state level. When I first announced my campaign on August 7th, my initial thought was, oh my gosh, right, I'm doing this now. Since then, I have been invited in so many homes and shown the love and support and the strength of the town of Dartmouth, the city of New Bedford, and this entire region. Because that's who we are here on the South Coast. We're a strong group of people that sticks together. We're a strong group of people that understands the disinvestment, or I guess you could say, the lack of access and transparency into our state house when we're talking about being left out of state's plans. That didn't start with Mr. Markey. That started way before him, but has continued under his leadership. I'm running because I want to bring this strong show of love and support to the state level. One that is grounded in decisions made by people from across this room, from those at home, from those watching later on, so that way we have legislation that is not only implemented for the people, but by the people. I love the opportunity to be here today to talk to all of you. I've loved the opportunity to be offered water when it feels like 97 degrees outside, or sunscreen because I've already gone through 2 bottles, right? Because that's how much this district matters. We need somebody at the state level that's going to fight for us, that's going to show up every single day, and that starts by voting Cameron Costa on September 6th as your next state representative. Because I will always show up for you, and I will always fight for you. Best believe that. Let's win this together.
All right, thank you, Challenger Cameron Costa. Now to have your closing statement, incumbent Representative Christopher Markey.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I couldn't be more proud to be from down in the South Coast. But let's think about, in the last 12 years, what's actually happened down here. I'm tired of people complaining that the South Coast doesn't get anything. They whine, they complain. We just got $900 million invested in a rail that came down here in the last 4 years. We have, 10, 12 years ago, we have a $120 million new marine terminal for offshore wind. On Brayton Point, they're gonna build a manufacturing plant that creates wires. It's gonna go all the way out to all the offshore wind turbines. We're gonna have offshore wind turbines that are put together, cleaned, manufactured, maintained in New Bedford. How can we complain about that? How can we complain about that? That's state investment coming our way. Then we can talk about local things that we've done. The causeway in Padenaro. The rooftops at many of the schools in Dartmouth from the building authority. Those take advocacy skills. And I believe that my advocacy skills, as being a lawyer for 28 years, being a father of 4, and caring about this community that has blessed me with so much. There is no one who fights harder than me. There is no one who is always looking for an opportunity to be creative and get things done than me. In my relationships with the governor's office, my relationships with the selectmen in town, my relationships with the city council, those all are investments for the long term to make sure our community is a better place. Vote Markey September 6th, the day after Labor Day, and make sure you tell a few friends to vote for Markey as well.
All right, I'd like to thank everyone here for coming out here to the Dartmouth Town Hall and for watching on both YouTube and Dartmouth Community Television. We'd like to remind you that the state primary election is on Tuesday, September the 6th of 2022. The polls are open at 7 a.m. and will close all the way at 8 p.m., so you have no excuse for not voting. There is also early in-person voting, which is between August the 27th and September the 2nd. You can also ask your local town or city clerk's office for places and times for early in-person voting. We'd also like to take the opportunity to thank our panelists from WBSM News Director Kate Robinson, and from the Dartmouth Week, it is Mr. Christopher Shea. I'm Paul Santos, your moderator. Thank you very much for tuning in to this debate.
Great job. Great job.